Now, please help me, everybody. Welcome to the stage, Steve Lowisz.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. How is everyone? So, before I get started, I got a question. Do you guys believe in coincidences? Yes or no? Or do you believe that coincidences are something that actually was meant to be in the first place? Which one is it? So I don't know that Kristen knows this, but when she called me last year and said, hey, we'd like you to open the conference, and the whole theme is untangle your influence, what she didn't know at the time is I just finished writing a chapter for the book that's launching in probably end of December, early January, called Finding Your Inspiration. There's no way we could make that up. But given that, if you don't care, I'm going to come down to you because you guys are the heroes. Me standing on the stage to be the hero just doesn't work. Are you guys okay with that? Good. So we all have one. Let's get started. We all have one, and many of you have more than one. It's that person that you look up to. It's that person that you respect. It's that person who's been your hero at some time in your life. Have you had one of those people? If you have, raise your hand. And this is probably the person that gives you the inspiration to get better. Yes? And they continue to pour into you without expecting anything in return. Would that sound about right? So here's the question, though. Who is that person to you? How many of you it's a parent? Raise your hand. How many of you it's a grandparent? Raise your hand. How many of you it's a coach that you had sometime in your past, a couple? Who else has been that person for you? Just throw it out. You don't need to raise your hand. Throw it out. Who's been that person for you? Former HR leader, your boss? Can we put it in that category of it at some point it was your boss? Who else? We're going to come back. Who said teacher? Raise your hand. We're going to come back to you. Who else? Spouse? There's got to be more. Have you not had that? Did everyone raise their hand for parent? Is that why? Like, come on. What about this idea of a teacher? Let me go back to 1983, and I know some of you are not even old enough to know when 1983 was, especially the folks sitting here in the front, right? But in 1983, there was a teacher, Miss Sisy, who was going into her 8th grade class. It's a private school, it's a small organization, but she was going into her 8th grade class, but she had to pay a little attention. This was her science class that she was actually leading. And as she was walking in, she had to take a look at where all the kids, what they were doing, how they were interacting, because this was the last day in March before spring break. Now think about that when you were in 8th grade, and it's the last class, the last hour, the last day before spring break. Where was your head? Were you ready to learn science in 8th grade at that point? What were you ready to do? Like, I want to go to the beach. I'm ready to go to Florida. I'm ready to get the hell out of here at that point, right? So she kind of realized that this might be going on. So as she walked into the classroom, she paid attention to the boys that were up in the front that were tossing a football back and forth. Now, she had told them a ton of times, don't be tossing a football in my class, because every so often they would miss. And what would happen? It hit her a number of times. But she didn't say anything at this second. Back row, there was a bunch of girls passing notes back and forth to each other, probably making stories up about the boys that are in the front causing problems, all kinds of things happening. But up at the front, there was a young girl named Denise. And Denise's eyes were all puffy and red. And the reason for that is her dog had just died. But that wasn't the worst of it. Her parents were going through a divorce, and they were using her against each other through the divorce. So she was not having a good morning. So as Miss Sisy looked out at the other students, some of them are staring out the window, you could tell nobody cared about learning at that particular point. We all are feeling the same thing, right? Like, why would you at that point? So she made a quick decision. She went into the class, sat down her bag, took out that lesson plan for the day, held it up to everybody and said, here's today's lesson plan, and tore it in half and threw it in the garbage. What do you think the kids did at that point? Woohoo, man, this is good. What are we going to do next? So she had to take a few minutes to get them to calm down because they were getting rowdy at this point, way too nutty. Waited a few minutes to calm down, and she said, okay, here's what we're going to do. Take out a piece of paper and find a pen or a pencil, and she waited for them to do that. A few seconds later, she said, here's what I want you to do. On the left-hand side of that paper, write the names down of the other 26 kids that are in the class. There's 27 kids in the class. They did. They started writing down the names. But on the right side, what I want you to do is write down one thing that you respect, admire, like, appreciate about that person. But it has to be positive. It can't be negative. So first the kids, I think, thought she was joking. She was like, okay, let's do this. So they started writing the names and started writing the comments on the right-hand side. And some of the kids were kind of looking around at, what do I write about him? What do I write about Megan? What do I write about Kristen? I have no idea. But eventually they got through it at that particular point. It took them about 35 minutes to do this. Right, think about it, 26 other kids, 27 total. At the end of class, the bell rang, and the kids are going to file out, and as they filed out, they gave that piece of paper with their name at the top, 26 kids, and all the positive things on the right-hand side to Miss Sisy, and she took all of them. She took them home with her during spring break. And during spring break, she decided to categorize them by child. So she took out a blank sheet of paper, wrote the child's name at the top, and then looked for the 26 comments about that child so they would be all together, one at a time. 756 comments later, took her a little bit of time to put all this together. She had them all done. Took her all week, just about, because she worked on it a little bit at a time. And then the following Monday, the week after spring break, the kids are coming back. And as they walked into the classroom, what did she do? As each one walked in, she looked for the name, handed that piece of paper to that child. So as Johnny walked in, Johnny got a piece of paper that had his name on top that Miss Sisy had put up there, and 26 comments or more, all the positive things that all the other kids had said about Johnny. And she did this over and over and over with every child as they came in and they ultimately sat down. And as she's paying attention to them, some of them are kind of sitting up a little straighter. Why is that? A little bit of confidence, like that was a good thing. Some of their eyes got a little red. Why? Because of all the positive things. Some got embarrassed, their faces beat red. And it took them a couple of minutes to kind of go through all the different emotions that were going on. And she let it happen. But then at the end of that, she went to her bag, pulled out her lesson plan, and started to teach. Am I done with the story? What happened next? 7 years later, it's 1990, 1991. What was going on in the world in 1990 and 1991, for those of you that were alive? What was happening in the world at 1990 and 1991? Who remembers? Desert Storm, Iraq War. You're not old. They're just really young. That brings the average down, so you got younger just a second ago. The Iraq War was going on. Operation Desert Storm had happened. And Miss Sisy was at her home. She was doing her lesson plans, which she was always really good about doing in advance, and the phone rings. She picks up the phone and says, hello, and there's nobody there. So she's getting ready to hang up, and she hears a little bit of a murmur on the other end of the phone. She says, hello? And that murmur turned into a bit of a cry. A few seconds later, that cry became a wail. where she was just bawling on the other end of the phone. And she didn't know who this person was. She's like, what is going on? What felt like minutes was actually just a few seconds. But the lady on the other end of the phone said, look, this is why I'm calling you. I apologize. I'm so emotional. But my son, who was in your 8th grade class in 1983, served his country and died 2 days ago. She didn't know who it was for a second. And as they continued to talk, she realized it was Johnny's mom. Johnny was the kid in the front that was always the troublemaker with the football. She had a fond memory for a second. At the time, she was ticked. But she had a fond memory of him tossing that football, not quite listening to what she was supposed to say. And he had passed away serving his country. No wonder the mother was so upset. Well, the mother actually invited Miss Sisy to come to the funeral, which was a few days later. It's a very small town, private school, everything's kind of all together. So Miss Sisy didn't want to go because she hasn't seen Johnny since 8th grade. She didn't know what happened to him after that, and now he's gone. It's not like she had that kind of a relationship with him. But she decided to go anyway because the mother called. So she gets to the funeral, the home where he's all laid out, and there's pictures of him from the time he was born, 1st grade, 2nd grade, all the way to the 8th grade class, 1983, that had all 27 students and Miss Sisy in the picture, to high school, to when he graduated from basic training and was deployed. All of those pictures are lined up there. And she felt a little bit of a tear coming because she didn't get to know that Johnny that all of those pictures represented. And she felt a little awkward because she was the only one that she could recognize. She didn't know anybody else because she had been so disconnected. As the funeral was ending, Johnny's mother walked over to her, invited her over for dinner, which is just a few blocks down the street. Now she's really a little uncomfortable, but decided to go anyway. And she's the last one to pull into the driveway. Everybody's already there, cars lining the street, but there was one spot open. So she pulls in the driveway and she walks in. And as she walks in, she sees all of these probably friends and family members talking about Johnny, how he was an inspirational light to everybody. From the time he was a little kid, to the time he went to high school, to the time he was deployed in his platoon, everybody loved this guy because he had so much energy to give to other people and never asked for anything in return. And she asked Miss Sisy to follow her back, so they walk to the back of the house. There's 2 bedrooms off in one corner, and they walk into one of the bedrooms. That was obviously a young boy's bedroom because it had awards all over the wall for football, basketball, baseball, medals, all the typical stuff you'd find in a boy's room. See, Johnny was really, not only was Johnny like a great kid, he was a really smart kid, and he was good at everything he decided to play. But he was so humble about it. So as Miss Sisy's looking around the room, there's a desk off to one side. And it's a small desk like you would use when you're in 8th grade, 7th grade, 6th grade. And she realized that that was probably the desk that Johnny was doing homework at in 8th grade in 1983. But there was one thing out of place. Sitting on that desk was a helmet. And it was tan and brown and a little green. It was a camouflage helmet. And Johnny's mother walked over to the helmet, grabbed the helmet, flipped it over, and reached inside, and crumbled up inside was a little tiny piece of paper that was tattered and folded. It was just a mess. And she hands it to Miss Sisy, and she said, open this. She starts to open it up. She folds the flap open, and it says Johnny, but it's her writing. She continues to open it up. You know where this is going. It's actually that piece of paper where she wrote Johnny at the top and 26 comments from 26 other students about how great Johnny was, what they respected about Johnny. The story doesn't actually end there. A few seconds later, a minute later, whatever it was, another individual walked in. And he happened to have his dress uniform on for the funeral. He was also in the military, in the Army. And he walked up to Miss Sisy, he pulls out something out of his pocket, and he says, "I got mine too." It was one of the other kids that Johnny was throwing the football to all the time. But it still didn't end there. A few minutes later, this young lady comes in, runs up to Miss Sisy, almost tackles her, gives her a hug, and is bawling on her shoulder and says, "I have mine too, and it saved me in my darkest time when I was ready to take my life." They sat there and they bawled for a short period of time. What's my point to the story, which is real? It's not a fake story. What can we learn from that story that is relevant to us today when we think about this idea of untangling our own inspiration? What can we learn from this? I think there's at least two things, and then we'll continue on. Number one, like Miss Sisy, HR doesn't always feel the impact or see the impact for the work that you're always doing. It took her 7 years. She taught for 36 years. She continued to pour into kids. She only got recognized that we know of that one time. That brings me to the second point. What keeps somebody like Miss Sisy, what keeps her going? What keeps her driving? What can we learn from that we can apply to understand what drives us in the first place? That's a deep story, I understand. But let's look about what's happening in HR, or what's happened. Kristen actually mentioned this. What's the last 4 or 5 years been like for HR? Okay, how many are like, it sucked? It's okay, we're not going to share this with anybody. It sucked. Did it not? Wasn't it tough? What did you have to deal with over the last 4 or 5 years? COVID. What else? Burnout. What else? Layoffs. What else? What else have you dealt with? War on talent. Politics. There's no wrong answer. What else did you deal with? Mental health issues. DE and I. What else? Inflation. I can't miss you guys over here. What have you dealt with? Because somebody else is going to say, yes, I dealt with that too. Those are all the popular ones. What's all the crap that you had to deal with that's not as popular? Work from home, remote, do it right at the same time. I thought that was a good thing for everybody. All right, I'm not getting into that conversation today. But what else did you have to deal with? Change, what? Did I hear assholes? For the record, I didn't say it first, just second. I mean, it's been a tough go. Now, I don't want to say that it doesn't matter, because it does. But I'm not going to go down the regular path of just go take some time off. But I will say this. Think about what's happened, what you guys did, all of you collectively, when things were going downhill. What did you do during that time? You took your best interests and put them on the back burner because you were focused on doing what? You were focused on taking care of everybody else, supporting everybody else, making sure everybody else was safe, inspiring others to continue to do what they do. Is that accurate? So here's my question. What about you? How do you continue to give when you feel like nobody's given to you, and maybe even a little taken for granted? How many feel like that sometimes? I mean, we all do. I'm not even in HR technically, kind of, but you feel taken for granted. How do you actually continue to inspire others to continue to give when nobody's been there to inspire you? And then go to the title of this whole conference. How do you untangle your own inspiration? What are you doing now? Real question that you can answer. What are you doing to keep doing what you do? What are you doing to find your own inspiration at this point? What? Breathing. Love that one, actually. That was a great way to start, Megan. What else are you doing when it comes to untangling your inspiration, to getting yourself inspired to go back to work every day, to keep doing what you're doing when it sometimes feels like the world is falling apart around you? What are you doing? Watching TikTok. You're doing that right now, aren't you? Reading? What's that? You came to the MiSHRM conference to get a quick recharge, to get inspired for what comes next. That's a good one. What else? Living purposely through your values. Tell me more about that one. Learning and growth are paramount. We've had this conversation. We have. Keep going with that.
Yeah, but I mean, it's part of that North Star for me. So I'm setting my intention for the day. Am I doing it with purpose and intention? And then I'm reflecting at the end saying, did I live up to that?
Is he doing it with purpose and intention? And then at the end of the day, reflecting, am I good with that? Excellent. Thank you. What else are we doing? How are we getting ourselves up every morning to keep doing the stuff you have to do, which matters, and almost nobody appreciates it? And you know that I'm exaggerating a little bit, right? Because there's a few of us that do appreciate it, right? I know we don't always make it known that that's the case. What else are we doing? What's that? Supporting others. Well, that gives you some inspiration because it actually feels good to support others. Absolutely. When you think about how Miss Sisy felt after 7 years. Oh my gosh. That probably, she worked for another like 17 years after that, a total of 36 years. That probably gave her enough energy to keep going. Unfortunately, most of us aren't like that. And that's what we have to figure out what to do even more practically. Anything else that I missed that you're doing? Practicing gratitude. What does that do?
It makes you more aware of the things you're grateful for.
Makes you more aware of the things that you're grateful for. What else? I love that. What's that? You have a book that you keep that you can track all the things that you did well, got a compliment. I'm paraphrasing so everybody could hear because not everybody can hear. What else? So here's the thing. Let's think about this. We try to motivate ourselves. We try to inspire ourselves, right? There's a saying out there that says, hey, if you live your purpose, you'll never work another day in your life. All right, wait a minute. How many of you feel HR is your purpose? Wait a minute. There's like, maybe you didn't hear me. Let me try that one more time. How many of you found your purpose in something HR that you're doing? All right, this is a bigger problem than I thought. Let's think. For those of you that raised your hand and said, this is my purpose, is every day like no work? Or are still there some days where they're like, I can't say that, crap. Well, this is a crappy day. Is that fair? So this idea of find your purpose and you'll never work another day in your life until the next pandemic, until I got to fire somebody, until somebody complains, until. So I agree with the overall moniker of it, but is the practicality of it true? Can you make that happen every day? There's a small population that can. Most of us cannot. So what do? We read a book. We watch a Tony Robbins video. We look at TEDx. What are the other things? I mean, you mentioned a bunch of these things. And then it gives us this dose of motivation and inspiration. We get to the top of the mountain, and what happens? Did you hear what she said? They push us off. Okay, we went from really serious to, oh my gosh, somebody's going to get killed here, right? This is not cool. But what do? We get to the top of the mountain. It's just natural human nature when this happens. We're there for, I don't know, an hour, a day, a week, a month, and then what happens? If there's not a continuous influx of inspiration, what happens? We fall off the mountain, we go back to the bottom. Yet we're doing this for other people too, and we're trying to inspire each other. And I'm not saying not to do that, but I inspire you to get halfway up the mountain, and then I walk away, and what happens to you if when you're halfway up the mountain? You roll right back down. But yet we think about inspiration in terms of, I got to keep inspiring Kyle. Every time I connect with Kyle, I got to inspire him. Every time I connect with Kyle, I got to inspire him. Kyle, I am not inspiring you today. It's like think about the thing that we've created here, that it's all about we've got to inspire. We've got to get inspired. Now, just bear with me for a second here, because I believe in inspiration. But is there a possibility we have the model upside down? Is it easy to buy into the myth that inspiration hinges on somebody else or something else doing something for me? But half of it at least. Is that possible? Think about this for a second. If you're walking around thinking somebody's got to inspire me, what did you do with all the control you have in life? Think about this you gave it away. Think about the definition of inspiration that we potentially use in that example, that it's the precursor to action. Is it? Is inspiration the precursor to action? And if it is, and we get inspiration from others, do you mean the only way we take action is when I inspire Kyle, and that's the only way? And I don't think that's the case with Kyle, because he wouldn't be here. Sorry to pick on you, Kyle. Right? But let's think about how we look at this whole idea of inspiration. So I have had a love-hate relationship with inspiration. What do I mean by that? Any guesses? How many of you have had a love-hate relationship with inspiration? Why? There's a few hands that went up. If anybody minds, you can just chime right in. Why have you had a love-hate relationship with inspiration? Or is everybody like, no, I just love it? Yours is not consistent. Whose is? Who's feeling not inspired right now? It's okay, you can be mean. You got to have a little bit of fun with it, right? But let's think about this. So in 2009, this is my love-hate relationship with inspiration. In 2009, I realized I was exceptionally uninspired. Like, no joke. Like, I was uninspired in my business. I was uninspired in my marriage. I was uninspired as a parent. I was uninspired with friends. I was uninspired. It was a dark moment in my life that actually culminated in 2009. It was actually going on way before that. For about 40 years it had gone on, just for the record. But in 2009, I started to see things a little bit differently. So I want to walk you through the journey and the questions that I had to ask to untangle my own inspiration. And maybe they're questions that you can ask to untangle your own inspiration so you don't have to rely on somebody else. I'm not saying we don't need to give it. I'm not saying that we don't want to receive it. We should always want to give it and receive it, right? But do we count on everybody else to do it for us? I did. Why do you think in 2000? So here's what happened. In 2009, I had a coach. I had a coach for many, many years. And his name was John, and John came to me. And this is no relation to any of the other Johnnies or anything. John came to me and he said, Steve, I can't help you anymore. Your uninspiredness, if that's even a word, I can't help you with anymore. I think you need to talk to another coach. I'm like, oh, great. I'm paying one of you. Now you want me to pay for two of you? Are you crazy? I don't want to pay for any more inspiration. He said, that's not it. He said, here's the thing. Because you had alienated your kids, you had fired people you shouldn't have fired in your businesses, you had asked your wife for a divorce. Oh yeah, it was bad. Never got divorced, 32 years, hurrah, right? That's a great thing. But think of how uninspired somebody is to go through all of that at that time. Now, is it as bad as what you guys have been dealing with the last 5 years? I don't know. Maybe. Maybe not, right? Because it's been hell. I do know that. So when he called me, he said, here's the guy I want you to talk to. His name is Burke, and he was John's coach at some point in the past. And he said, the reason I want you to talk to Burke is Burke deals with people like you. What the hell does that mean? And he said it again to me, and I'm like, okay, this is not inspiring, John. I've already got some challenges with inspiration, and he deals with people like you. Okay, I'll have the conversation. This is March of 2009 when I have the conversation with Burke. And Burke is a wonderful guy, and he has dealt with people, let's just say, on a different level than me. Names that we would all know that have had a lack of inspiration in either a part of life or multiple parts of life or their entire life. And this is what he does. And he was telling me about this process that he calls the wisdom quest, that he wants to take me through. John had told him all about my lack of inspiration. He said, I don't know if it'll help, but if you pay attention to the process, maybe there's hope for you. And I'm like, dude, maybe there's hope. People like you and John are like driving me nuts here. You want me to be inspired, and all you do is keep piling on. Have you ever felt that way? But as he kept talking about the process and about the way some of the people responded and where they are now in life, I mean, you couldn't help but to get excited. I got inspired to be like, I can do, if that guy can do it, I think I can do this thing. So I was pretty excited. You know how you get that inspiration to like, I'm just going to go do whatever, doesn't matter, I'm just going to go do it, right? We've all kind of tried something like that at some point or another. And I'm like, okay, let's do this. When are we doing this? In a month. Awesome. Where? In the desert. Really? Yes, you're going to fly. We're going to go to Arizona, and I'm going to meet you in the desert, and I'm going to walk you through a process. I said, okay. I was motivated, man. I came back and I told my wife, everything's going to change, honey. And by that time, she thought I was full of crap anyways, right? Because I had just asked her for a divorce not long before this, just for the record. Had nothing to do with my wife. It was my uninspired mindset. Extreme, I get it. This is how I am. I'm extreme one way or the other. It's just there's no in between for me, unfortunately. So I'm excited. It's a month away. I buy my plane ticket. And then what happens? Life. Life happens. It's 2 weeks later, 3 weeks later, I'm like, I'm not leaving to go to the desert for a freaking week. Life is here. I'm just uninspired. It's the typical highs and lows of inspiration. Somebody gets you all excited about something. 3 days later, you go back to your house, and what happens? You crash. In fact, it's kind of like a sugar rush. Think about it. How many of you have young kids? And when you get them all sugared up, about 30 to 50 minutes later, depending on the metabolism, what happens to the kid? Crash or goes way out of control, or a little bit of both, right? Like, this is what we do when we focus on this idea of inspiration and motivation, because it's not consistent. I did the exact same thing. So I called him up a week before I'm supposed to go, and I said, Burke, I'm not coming. He's like, what happened? You were so excited. I said, I know, but I'm not now, so I'm not coming. He says, all right, I'm going to call you in a month. I said, you do that. Calls me in a month. I mean, this is what he does. He says, Steve, you should do this. Let me give you some examples of 2 other people since we spoke last that have gone through it, where they were, what they're doing now, and the progress they have made. And I thought, if they can do it, I can do it too. This is number 2 go around, right? I can't be that bad. He says, all right, here's the dates. You're going to come and we're going to take you through this. And I'm like, yes. And what happened? Life happened. Now, I lost my first flight, what I paid for it, $900 and some for the flight. I made the flight again. And what did I do 5 days before I was supposed to go to Arizona? Burke, life happens, dude. I am just not that interested. I'll talk to you later. And he's like, I can't control that. He tried to have the conversation with me. I didn't let him do it. So this is now April of 2009. Let's fast forward to December of 2009. And out of the blue, Burke calls me and says, Steve, how are you? And I knew his voice right away because you just can't forget the voice. And I said, Burke, thank you for calling no. He's like, I didn't ask anything. I said, no, I know what you're going to do. This is not what I want to do. And he says, here's the deal. I've been thinking about you. Remember I asked the question about coincidences? Can't they get kind of crazy, a little creepy at sometimes? He says, here's the deal. I've been thinking about you. I think you need to come next week, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday. Next week. This is what Tuesday or Wednesday of the previous week. You need to come next week. Like, do you really think my calendar is going to allow for that? He says, just deal with it and look. I look at my calendar, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday. Is there anything on my calendar? The first time in frickin' history, the one time I want something to be on my calendar, and there's nothing except Friday night, which is our company Christmas party. Nothing else. I couldn't even lie about it because I felt so bad. I was like, I wanted to say I can't move this and I can't move that, and I couldn't do any of that stuff. So I said, all right, I'm gonna do this. And he's like, you are? Yeah, I'm gonna try this. He says, all right, you got homework before you come. What? This is next week and now you're gonna pile on homework? And he said something to me that I will never forget. And he said, Steve, trust the process. It doesn't make sense yet, but it will. Steve, trust the process. And I said, fine. So he sends me an email with attachment after attachment after attachment, like he was going to be my shrink or something, because the questions went back to the time I was a kid, my relationships with my father, my relationship. Man, a proctologist would know less about me. Like it was, but here is the interesting thing. So I did it. From that night till Friday, I had till Friday at midnight to send it to him. He was like a teacher or something. So I sent it to him, but as I did it, and I started to reflect on some of the things I was writing, I actually got a little excited, answering his questions, going through his assessments, because I got a little better understanding, at least I thought at the time, about who I am. And the process actually was like, okay, this isn't so bad. This doesn't suck as much as I thought it was going to suck. Tuesday morning comes, I'm at the airport in Detroit, and what happens? I didn't cancel, but I sure thought about it. No, so I get to the airport, my wife's like, get out of here, because if anything changes, that's a good thing for us at this particular point. I'm kidding, she's not like that. But I get to the airport on Tuesday morning. Monday, I'd already been a full day of work, and it's like, life happens, and I sit down, and I'm like ready to go up to the desk and say, cancel my flight. I'm ready to go up to the desk and say, cancel my flight. Take a deep breath. Thank you, Megan. I didn't know her back then. I wish I did. And I decided not to cancel. So a few hours later, I'm on the flight, and I meet him in Arizona. Burke picks me up from the airport. And I'd seen him on video, but I'd never met the guy. And as we're driving to the middle of nowhere, like literally a cabin in the middle of the desert that all you see is nothing. It doesn't even look cool because it's brown. I mean, it's so bad. And that evening, we continued the process, as he calls it, and he continued to ask questions. He took the information that I had given him through Friday, and he's just pounding me with additional questions and thoughts, and I'm up and I'm down, and it's like, what are you trying to do? Kill me with a heart attack? It isn't bad enough already? And he says to me again, what? Trust the process. And I'm like, fine. He says, now you're prepared. I said, prepared for what? To go out into the desert by yourself for the next 2 days. I'm like, what? You said we were going to spend some time in the desert. You didn't actually tell me I was going to be in the desert by myself for 2 days. He says, because you weren't ready for it. You weren't prepared. We hadn't gone through the process. If I would have told you that, what would you have done? Given you the finger and run. Right? I wouldn't have been there any longer. I said, fine. What am I supposed to do out there? You'll figure it out. Really? I'll figure it out. So now I'm kind of ticked again. 3:30 in the morning, the next morning, Wednesday morning, he gets me up and he says, let's go. Where are we going? He says, you're not far enough away. You got to get further away. So we drove for another 45 minutes, and then he said, follow me. Parked the car, and we walked down this path for another 30 minutes or so in the middle of the desert at night. And in the middle of the desert at night, do you know what happens in the desert? Well, I don't know. I didn't see the coyotes. But there's animals frickin' everywhere. And so he walks me over to an area that's about a half a mile square, maybe a little bit bigger than that. And he says, here's my advice. Don't leave this area. And I said, why? And he points over to the edge and he says, see that dung that is, you know, dung, crap? And it's steaming. He said, that's mountain lion or something like that. And if you go out there, you might get eaten. Now, how do I feel at this point? How inspired am I to be in the middle of the desert when he's telling me all this? You can answer that. Like, I wanted to get out of there. He says, I'll see you in 2 days. So here's what I have. I have a folding chair. I have water. I have notebooks to write on and 2 pens. I have no food. I have no shelter. I have the clothes on my back. That's it. And he leaves. And the sun is not up. It's 5 o'clock in the morning. How happy do you think I am? How inspired am I to be out there? Like, not even a little bit. I'm pissed, to say it lightly. So I start going up and down in this path or this area that's a half a mile square. So I'm just kind of irritated. I'm getting angry. I'm fuming. I'm sure I was saying things that I could never say in front of an HR professional, and I won't say it here, although I've heard some of you say it, just for the record, hey, right? And now I'm at my wit's end, so I had to take a seat, and this man-made berm, I decided to put the chair at the top of the man-made berm, and I just kind of plopped in that chair, ticked. And I'm just kind of looking out, and there was no clouds in the sky, so the stars are kind of lighting stuff up, and there's a mountain in front of me. I thought, okay, that's cool. At least I can see something instead of just dead cactus and mountain lion dung or whatever it was. I don't think it was coyote. It was way too big, just for the record, right? So as I'm looking at the mountain that's in front of me, the sun starts to come up behind me. And what's it going to do to the top of the mountain? It's going to shine a little bit of light at the top of the mountain. And you can see it. The top of the mountain looks really cool because the light's barely hitting it. So I'm watching this for a while, and as the sun comes up, how does the light come down the mountain? Little state, right? Gradually down the mountain. So the entire mountain is starting to get illuminated. I'm like, oh, this is kind of cool. It gets closer and closer and closer. And eventually, the sun is literally right in front of me, and I'm sitting in the shade. Eventually, it's got to cross where you are, right, as the sun goes up. I don't know how long it took. I may have been there for 3 hours at that point, 2 hours. I have no idea. I've lost complete recollection of time. But eventually, I look to my left, and there's sun. I look to my right, and there's sun. And I'm sitting in a shade spot. And what I realize is there's a mountain behind me as well. But I'm not sure how they ended up lining like they did. And I was at the peak of the shadow of the mountain behind me. I thought, this is cool. A little freaky, but this is cool. I picked the one spot. Coincidences, right? 10 minutes later or so, I look to my left, there's sun. I look to my right, there's sun. I'm still in the shade. That's not supposed to happen, for the record. The earth is spinning, sun move. Anybody understand that? Like, at this point, I'm freaking out because I'm realizing that I'm still sitting in the same spot. And I think coincidences, there's a reason for all of them. So I start freaking out a little bit. There's all kinds of emotion coming to my head. I end up taking out the pieces of the binders and stuff that I had to write on the tablets, whatever the case is, and I start writing like crazy. And I start asking myself questions about why I wasn't inspired, asking myself questions, why I had treated people the way that I had treated, what was going on, until I started to write apology letters to the people that I had fired and I shouldn't have, to my wife who I'd asked for a divorce, to my kids who I alienated, to my friends that I was not a friend at all to. And I just kept going. And as I'm writing, I'm actually writing about what do relationships mean to me. And as soon as I started writing that paragraph, 3 people are walking up the path. No vision, these are like 3 people. It's not that crazy, right? But 3 people are walking up the path because it is kind of a hiker's path. But here's the clincher. They're in their 70s and 80s, I'm guessing. 3 of them. And one of them's got a cane and kind of hobbling along. I don't know how far we were out at that point. I just didn't understand it. But they came up exactly when I'm writing about relationships. And that was my picture of what relationships were supposed to be. Now think of how inspirational that should have been. Should have been. Should have been. Because it stuck for a minute, because I ended up writing for the next 2 days. All kinds of, I just couldn't stop writing. I didn't sleep, not one wink. I just couldn't. Bert comes to pick me up Friday morning and he looks at me and he says, "Are you okay?" And I said, "No." He said, "Can you talk about it?" And I said, "No, are you crazy? Take me to the airport." Now, mind you, I'd been in the desert for 2 days. It does get hot during the day and I didn't take a shower. And I went to the airport, got on the plane, and I went home. And my wife was kind enough to pick me up at the airport. And she looks at me, and first she said, "You stink." And then she said, "Are you okay?" And I said, "No." I said, "I can't talk about it right now." That was the night of our company Christmas party. So I take a shower, get to the company Christmas party. We're the last ones in. My assistant sees me from across the room. I had known this woman for 15 years. She's since retired. And she runs up to me, gives me a bear hug, and she's about this big. And almost lifts me off my feet. And she starts crying on my chest. And she's like, "I don't know what happened, but you're not the same guy that left." I'm like, "How did you know this?" Coincidence? I don't know. The next morning, I had my family over, my son, my daughter, their significant others, my wife, everybody, and I handed them all the letters that I had written pages and pages and pages on, talking about a cry fest. But here's the cool thing. Would I have been inspired at that point? Should I have been inspired at that point to change my life around? What do you think? Do you think it stuck? It did for a little bit of time. Because I came back and I did learn about myself. The process got me excited. And I tried to make changes, and I did. But what happened 4 months later? I found myself reverting back, and it's like, if you had gone through that experience, would you let it not impact you? Would you let it not inspire you? Think about that for a second. How would that have impacted you if you went through the same experience as I did? Would you be inspired to actually make a change? Would you be inspired that, oh my gosh, I'm the only person that this has been allowed to happen to? Wouldn't that be a cool thing? But what happens after the motivational high? Because I didn't understand everything at that point. It's a motivational low. It's an inspirational low at that particular time. Now let's translate that to the business world for a second, because we're one of 2 things, and then I want to get into the 6 questions, and I'm going to completely change your opinion of inspiration. Is that fair? And if I don't, well, then just leave now, right? But here's the thing. We're either an employee and report to somebody, or we're a boss and have employees, and may have a boss as well. Fair? Okay. If you're how many of you are an employee? You actually report to somebody. The majority of the folks here. So you have a boss. And if your boss is here, do not use this rating, just for the record. But let's just say a number 1 boss is like really freaking incredible. A number 2 is pretty good. A number 3 kind of sucks, but isn't too bad. And a number 4 is like, get me the hell out of here. This is why we leave. I'm not going to ask you to rate your bosses, especially if they're here. But let's look at the numbers. About 10% of bosses, leaders, are in that number 1 category. That's it. Even if you have a number 4 boss who sucks, what's the role of a leader anyway? What's the role of your leader? What? Is their only role to inspire? So my job with my team, the only thing I need to do is inspire my team? That's my only job? What's the role of the boss beyond that? I do think that's a component of it. What's that? Lead them, train them, give them feedback, give them clarity. If you spent your entire day, or your boss spent their entire day inspiring you, how the hell do they get anything else done? Is it really their job to make you a better person? Is it really your boss's job to actually inspire you every day? I'm not saying it's not their job to bring inspiration and create an inspiring opportunity, but is it their job to inspire you every day to do your job, to inspire you to grow? Whose job is that? Oh my gosh, wait a minute. But inspiration, somebody's got to inspire me. I got to inspire them. Why do you think we have this? And if I'm the boss, I'm not going to spend all my time, 100% of my time inspiring. And if I report to the CEO, do I go to the CEO and say, Kyle, you're the CEO. It's your job to inspire me every day. What's the CEO going to say? They're going to laugh at me, what? It doesn't make any sense the way we think about this idea of inspiration. Inspiration is not a precursor to action. How many of you think I'm full of crap? It's okay, you can think that. Let me say it again. Inspiration is not a precursor to action. What is inspiration? Let's ask the questions. All right. I'm going to ask you to do a little work for like 2 minutes because I want this fast, really, really fast. When I finally came out of all of this process, which I'll explain in a second, I realized I had everything wrong. That this is the why inspiration is so up and down and it's so difficult to untangle, because I believe we have a messed up point of view of what it's supposed to be. So here's what I want you to do. Amongst your table, I'm going to give you about 2.5 minutes, maybe 3 minutes. Define inspiration amongst the group at your table. Go. Hurry up. There's a deadline here. You got to be quick. I'm hearing some comments I like. "45 seconds. Yeah, I cut it short already. What's the definition of inspiration? I know. What's the definition of inspiration? All right, I'll give you another 30 seconds. Who's got an answer for me? What's that? Inspiration is motivation. Are they the exact same? There's some similarities. Okay, we'll come back to that. Who else has an answer? Come on, I gave you like 45 seconds. What's your definition of inspiration? Anybody? Okay, what? Inner being. I mean, of course that's Megan. Inner peace. From the collective table. Okay, so what's the actual dictionary definition? I want to do these really fast. I didn't want you to look it up. I wanted yours. But what's the definition? What's the dictionary definition? It's actually on your screen. Someone or something that gives you ideas for doing something. Okay, this is the definition that makes the problem for us. If that is true, then it's a precursor to action. It is not a precursor to action based on my experience. And let me kind of explain why. Is that fair? So what is it? If it's not a precursor to action, what is inspiration? It's the thing that keeps you going. Action creates inspiration. Inspiration cannot consistently create action. It's a different word. What's the word that it really is? So that's one of them, but that's not enough. And I'll say it practically here in just a second. What? Discipline. Progress. What do I mean by progress? What do I mean by progress? It is not a precursor. The definition of inspiration is progress. Why does that make sense or not make sense to you? Progress, moving the ball forward, creates the inspiration to actually continue, not in reverse, because it doesn't stay when it's in reverse. If you can't take action, but think about it. How many times have you gotten up and I'm just not motivated to go to the gym? I'm not motivated to go to the conference today. I'm not motivated to go. Like, how many times have you done that? Okay, so here's the second question. If that's true, how do you get started with zero motivation? What do you do to get started with zero motivation? So let's talk about that because look, I don't know if it was the marketing team at Nike, but I'm going to call this into question. I don't know if this is the marketing team at Nike or their agency or whatever, but at least they probably understood the fact that if you do it, you're probably going to be inspired to continue. That still doesn't help me figure out how to get going. Just do it is a great moniker. And if you get to the treadmill and you start going, you end up doing pretty well, right? Once you get going. But why don't we just do it? Because we don't. Some do. Some have discipline in certain areas. Others, does it look like I have discipline on a treadmill? Right? Let's think about this for a second. If it's not just do it, what is it? Somebody said the power of why. I agree, but it's not practical enough. So there's three things. The just do it attitude, the power of why. If it's a big enough goal, if it's interesting enough, you'll do it. Is that true? Is that always true? If the goal is big enough, you'll just do it. How many of you have ever broken a New Year's resolution? It was a big deal, you had all your whys attached to it, you were excited and inspired, and then 30 days later, you don't touch it again and say, I'll get to it next year. How many of us have done that? So is the why a big enough practical thing? Is it a piece of it? Absolutely. What do we need? What questions do we need to ask? Practical. That sometimes mess with our mind, which is why we don't do it. And there's three of them. It's actually, can I do it is the first one, which is do I have the skills, the training to be able to do it? What's the second one? Will it work? Is the method you're asking me or the method I'm putting forth, will it work? One is training, one is education. The third one is, are the consequences big enough, important enough? And I mean consequences both positive and negative. There's your why. But let's face it, our why can be really powerful, and if we don't believe that we can do it, or if we don't believe that the method will work, am I going to do it? When people aren't motivated, when they're not inspired, you need to ask them, and I'm going to suggest you ask yourself those questions. Is it truly it's not a big enough why, or you don't think you can do it, or you don't think the process will work? Those are three very different questions, and if you can answer yes to all three, you can actually get it done. And it's not temporary inspiration. If you can't answer yes to all three, obviously you need to address that item and not just go, it's not a big enough why, which is kind of what we do when we talk about this idea of inspiration. Really quickly, third question I had to ask, What was my definition of success? What's your definition of success? Progress, meaning what? Yeah, think about what we do. The big goal. Success is hitting the big goal. Here's the problem with that. I'll use a big goal example real fast. When I first started my companies back years and years ago, like hitting $1 million was the goal. And we hit $1 million. And what did we say 30 seconds later? Let's go to 2 million. We hit the goal and we move on because it's not that big of a deal. We get to 5 million and it's like, okay, that means we could do more. But it was all the work that got us there that kept us excited about getting there. Success is being able to take the process and move it forward. What I didn't realize Burke was doing with me is setting me up through the process to realize we create our own inspiration. If we don't, we're at the mercy of everybody else. But we have to change our definition of what inspiration is. It can't be the one that I showed you earlier. Somebody else doesn't do it, we do it. It's the steps that we actually take that keep pushing us to do it. And then when we achieve it, it's like, oh, cool, off to the next thing. That's how our minds work. Think this through. Does most of your minds work this way? And you don't even realize that maybe some of you, your understanding of inspiration was what I had. Somebody had to inspire me. I had to get up inspired. I create my own. But there's 2 last questions, and then I'm going to end. Do I have 2 minutes or no? Who do you see in the mirror? This is a question that hurts, because in order to grow, we have to be self-aware. Progress is growth in your own life. Have you ever met somebody that thought they were the best leader in the world, and they sucked? Or they thought they were the best communicator in the world, but they just droned on? You've met these people, right? How do you get self-aware? You just think about it and say, I'm self-aware? How do you get self-aware? You have to ask other people, what's it like to be on the other side of you? It's not what you think, it's what they think. That stunts our progress. When we're not self-aware of the progress that we need to make, it rolls over into so many other parts of our life. We have to be self-aware. What are you willing to give up to grow up? And then the last one, who am I willing to inspire? Really quick, and then I'm done. Kristen, I'll hand it back off to you. What am I willing to give up? When you're growing, and growth causes inspiration for you to keep growing, which can completely change your world as it changed mine. But what are you willing to give up? How many of you know the story of Herman Cain? Anybody know? You know who he is? Ran for president long ago. He's since passed. He's a perfect example of this. Then I'll close with this. He went to work for Pillsbury early in his career, became a corporate VP at 36. He wanted to be there by the time he was 40. He wanted to be president of something at some point. Unfortunately, he couldn't because he never had a P&L job. So he went to the COO at Pillsbury and said, look, I want to learn. The process to get there excited him. He knew what the goal was, but he tossed the goal off and he said, I just need to figure out a way to get to president. I wanted to continue my progress. And the COO at Pillsbury said, here's the deal. You can get it. Go be a 3rd assistant manager at Burger King because we own it. And what do you think he did? Corporate VP, 3rd assistant manager at Burger King. What did he do? He went to Burger King, became a 3rd assistant manager because he understood that the process was the thing driving him. He was excited to be a manager at Burger King. And what happened? You know the end of the story? He became CEO of Godfather Pizza as soon as Pillsbury bought them because he learned to run a P&L. Would he have done that if he wasn't willing to give something up and if he wasn't focused on the process? Here's the last piece. The last question, I'm done. Sorry I went over. Kristen's going to be mad at me. Who are you willing to inspire? Which seems like an odd question given what we just talked about. I'm asking you who you're willing to inspire when I just said you shouldn't have to inspire as much as you do. You shouldn't need the inspiration. Here's what I mean by that. HR, you guys are the invisible heroes. Think about this for a second. If you could teach people that their view of inspiration actually isn't the right view. And you could create the environment where they understand what it means to create their own inspiration. You can change the world. And with that, I am finally done.